And so, to the next of our lightning talks. That's a talk that is quick, not a talk about lightning. Governments are always keen to ensure they're getting value for money from their spending, as of course are all are we, because it's our money that they're spending. UK central government contracts now include social value at a minimum of 10% of tender weighting. Excuse me. Increasingly, devolved and local authorities are choosing to request social value as part of bus tenders. So what is social value and how is it measured? Well, Rachel Hughes is here to tell you. Rachel is Director of Surbon Consulting. Rachel.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about social value. So, first of all, you should say, why would I listen to you, Rachel? What do you know about this subject? Well, I have been working in social value and sustainability for the past 15 years. As you can imagine, it's a very niche subject, and I'm a real hit at parties with this kind of chat, but there we go. So, by the end of this talk, I would like you to take away three things: what social value is, what it isn't, and how to do it easily. So first of all, social value. It's a requirement for people who commission public services to consider the wider social, economic and environmental impacts. So it's from a public sector perspective. In theory, it's supposed to give more value for money, which as taxpayers we should all be very happy about. But also then it allows allows more engagement in theory. Sometimes it doesn't always work. But that's what it is. That's the dictionary definition. So what is the history of social value, I hear you ask? So in 2012, there was a UK Social Value Act introduced by the House of Lords. So the requirement was to consider what social value was, consider social value during procurement. However, consider meant you could have a meeting, you could say it's been considered, and you could carry on your merry procurement journey. It didn't require actually doing something. Such as the vagaries of devolution is that Scotland and Wales introduced introduced their own version of social value, obviously being slightly different and therefore better in theory than the UK version. So this was around, and what this meant in public sector procurement, for example, rail, ferries, not buses so much, that it was around 2 to 3%. And then in 2016, there was a working group where people thought, hold on a minute, we need to get some more tangible metrics. So there was a workforce task force that got set up. And so what this meant was a whole long list of indicators. So there was, for example, every local job, wherever you are in the UK, creates a certain amount of money. And this list got longer and longer. So this was sort of being pushed and pushed, and then at the end of 2020, I'm sure we all remember that, in the middle of COVID and Brexit, a new procurement notice got issued called PPN 0620. It's an interesting read. It describes how UK central government departments and relevant authorities need to include social value, so it can't be consider, it has to be 10% weighting. And there's a lot of detailed guidance as to how to introduce this. So this came as quite a surprise because, funnily enough, it got overshadowed by other news at that time. And then what this has meant is that local authorities in particular have picked up this requirement. And so now I'm seeing social value in tenders up to 20%. And so there's lots of different ways as to how you can do this. So I'll talk about those as well, but that's a brief history. However, so what it's not. So it's not sustainability and it's not ESG. Admittedly, it covers elements of this, but when you're talking about social value, it's public sector have a social value strategy, private sector can support that. Sustainability is quite wide encompassing and it's very much a global definition. Social value at the moment is still quite niche. ESG is particularly around investment, so it's to make sure when talking to people, you question them as to what their meaning of social value is, because not everybody operates to this, and it kind of gets a bit messed up sometimes. So that's what it's not. It has some elements, but it's definitely not all of this. So social value procurement since particularly 2020 and PPN 0620, let's say it's had a bit of a bumpy ride. So I've put the photograph of the sweets there because somebody had described it to me as bid candy. which I think was quite a pithy description of it. But unfortunately, with the level of TOM, the level of indicators, this has meant that when you're writing a bid, some authorities have given you 100 indicators and said, we want answers to all of this. Now, this is incompatible with having a value for money solution as well. You don't want to add costs for cost's sake. And this is where social value has, I think, tripped itself up in the fact that people suggesting this has been too complicated, and it's been very difficult, so it's taken up time. So it's trying to make sure it's easy to do and self-explanatory so it delivers that value. And there's also been lots of, should we say, heated debates about what these values and whether they're correct or not. It turns out everybody's an economist secretly. So how is social value included in procurement? Now, I'm sure some of you will have worked with the TOMs. So that's the third circle, which is you have this long list of indicators, then you have to commit to that. This has been the approach pioneered in Manchester, particularly with TFGM. But this has been, shall we say, encouraged a sort of a optimistic or heroic response and not always deliverable. The first response, which is not as popular, but it's seen more in Sweden, is a mandatory approach, which is in the contract. So that isn't as popular. I think this is more difficult to do. It requires a very well-informed procurement authority to do this. And at the moment, that hasn't quite existed with social value. The most popular way is a question and answer. So this very much puts the onus to bidders. What is social value? What's your plan for this? And then bidders can respond back. And so this is, I would say, the simplest and easiest way to include it. However, it doesn't include an additional value, which is what people like to see nowadays. So the other way that has been seen by TfL and Northern Ireland is a points-based system. So this includes commitment, so jobs, but it limits it to contract value. So this means you don't get this heroic overbidding where when you're running a bus contract, you're going to commit to additional drivers. So this is something that I think was the best way of doing it. It's linked to the contract value, and it makes sure you don't add additional cost. So I have told you all of this, and you think, okay, great, Rachel, I know what it is, I know what it's not, I know the ways it could come up in a tender, so how can I put this into action? Well, the good news is you're probably doing some of this already, it's just not badged as social value. So there's a couple of examples here. I didn't want to include any from bus operators, given the competition. I didn't want to highlight who was good and who wasn't as good. I thought I'd leave it a level playing field. But these are a couple of examples of LinkedIn posts that can include social value. So whether that's recruitment, which I know is a problem in the industry, and engaging in different areas, working with Job Centre Plus, for example, and then mapping that and then telling people, charity donations is another example of what social value is. So you're doing this already. And so here's the example social value plan. So if you're sitting here thinking, great, Rachel, you've inspired me to do something about social value, then this is how I'd suggest you do it. So you don't need to hire a dedicated manager if you're SME, or even if you don't have the budget. I mean, let's face it, who does have the budget for things nowadays? But it's defining an owner within the company. It could be a marketing manager, it could be an operations manager, it could be somebody, but making sure that somebody has ownership of this. And establishing a review meeting, so making sure that directors, relevant heads are included and involved and know what needs to be done. Because if they don't know, then unfortunately it's not going to happen. And then create a shared workspace. You might be thinking at this point, Rachel, this is not very revolutionary, but these are the basic things. So social value is about tracking and recording and making most of what you're doing already. And then assessing what you're doing already. So whether that's doing charity fundraisers in depots, whether that's putting sustainability requirements into your tenders, recycled uniform is a good example. These are all things that you can include and it captures part of social value. And then also work out what it is that you're focusing on. So if you're recruiting people or you have a Women in the Workforce, for example, initiative, making sure you track that going forward on a monthly basis. You don't need to commit to 100 indicators. You can just be 10. It can be even 5, but then consistently publish this on I would suggest LinkedIn, on your website, and also to staff as well, so they know what this is. Because social value, it's a bit like carbon footprinting was back in the day, where people went, "Ooh, carbon footprinting isn't my shoe size." So it's trying to raise awareness to people of what it is and the good stuff that everybody's doing already, and make the most of that, and then telling that to public sector to help win tenders in the future. And then also, most importantly, is having an assurance process to make sure there's checking that happens as well. Sometimes people can get too enthusiastic about it, so it's making sure those claims are, if you created 5 jobs, they are 5 jobs, it's not 50, so make sure be very clear about that. And that's me. So if you'd like a free copy of these slides, just take a photograph and you can download it. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions or connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can talk about what's good and what's bad. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks very much indeed. And 10 minutes exactly, so well done. Well done.